Hey everybody, this is Meredith Miller with Inner Integration. Today, the message that I want to bring to you is, are all narcissists or psychopaths, sociopaths, etc., are they all addicts, right? My answer is yes, 100%. Now, before you jump to conclusions here, I just want to clarify, this doesn't necessarily mean the addiction that comes in a bottle, in a pill, in a needle, or gets snorted up their nose. The narcissist's primary addiction, they might have other addictions, porn, gambling, shopping, any of that. But the narcissist's primary addiction is absolutely invisible. It's absolutely invisible. You can't see it. You don't know it that they have this addiction. You don't understand what's going on. That invisible addiction that they have is called narcissistic supply. It's also called Fuel by H.G. Tudor. I don't know if you've seen any of his videos or his website. He declares himself a narcissistic sociopath or psychopath, and he puts out a lot of really valuable information coming from a person who does this. And he says that fuel drives everything we do. He said, there was never love for you, only for your fuel. So it's really important to understand that when you're trying to understand, when you're asking yourself, well, why does he or she do this? Why does he or she say that? Why does he or she do this? This is why. It's because they want the narcissistic supply. They want that fuel from you. There's two different kinds of fuel. There's the inanimate fuel, which is like status symbols, their job title, like CEO or something, could be driving a Ferrari, whatever kind of car that they're driving, some kind of gadgets that they have, like inanimate objects that give them a sense of status or fame, that sort of thing. Then there's the animate form of narcissistic supply, and that's what this video is going to focus on, because that involves the people, that involves you, right? Like if you found yourself entangled with one of these people, you found yourself as the supply source for a narcissist, a psychopath, a sociopath. So what does that look like? Well, essentially what that is emotional energy. It's your emotional energy. It can be positive, it can be negative, but predominantly what they want is flattery, praise, adoration, attention. Bottom line is attention, right? But again, that attention can be positive or negative. It feels them just the same. If somebody said something really nasty to you, you might be like really hurt. You might be upset. You might want nothing to do with that person. But that's why the narcissist will hang out there and pretend, that they're so hurt, by what you did, but they still want to keep engaging you, and they still want that supply from you. They love to manufacture those negative emotions like jealousy, anger, upset, devastation. They love that. It fuels them. It makes them feel important. So the most important thing to understand here is that this is why they do everything they do. This is what drives their behavior. Everything. So that thing that you're trying to still figure out, like, why did they do that? Why would they say that? This is why. So if you look back at that now, can you see that in a different light? Can you see how somehow they were trying to get supply from you? So another important thing to recognize is that the narcissist is utterly, hopelessly dependent on fuel, on narcissistic supply. They cannot live without it. They have this insatiable need to fill that void in their soul because they have this incredibly fragile ego, deep sense of insecurity, very low sense of self-esteem, even though they may present themselves, especially the overt types, will present themselves as having a high sense of self-esteem. The covert types will put on that false image by, talking about how cool they are, like how awesome they are, how smart they are, how cool they are in some kind of way. But all that's a facade. Like deep down, they have a deep, deep sense of insecurity. So this narcissistic supply, this fuel, is like an invisible currency. It's an invisible currency. Just like the abuse is invisible, so is this narcissistic supply that they're seeking out. And that's why it's so hard to figure out what it is, because you just can't see it. An important thing to recognize is that when the supply dwindles, like when you stop giving them supply, like they start doing some hurtful things, so you start giving them less positive attention, maybe you start withdrawing more, that's when the devaluation will start. Maybe you set a new boundary, right? Like you're like, okay, well, I'm not going to keep giving and giving in that way when this person is not reciprocating. you're going to set that new boundary, that's when the devaluation really starts. That's when you really start to see that person's true colors. And keep in mind that narcissists have sometimes a very complex fuel matrix, as H.G. Tudor calls it, meaning the multiple myriad of people involved that you don't even know about most of the time that they can get supply from. And he calls those primary, secondary, and even tertiary sources of supply. He has a scale, the lesser narcissist, not so smart, not as charming, resorts more to violence and aggression because they just don't have the charm and the smarts. And there's the mid-range narcissist, and there's the greater narcissist, right? H.G. Tudor considers himself a greater narcissist. That's the most covert. That's the most intelligent. That's the kind that's very meticulous at getting, what they want, and they know who they are. They know very well who they are. The lesser narcissist generally has no clue who they are. And so the higher level narcissist, he says, the more complex this fuel matrix is, meaning the more people involved, right? So he talks about how often, a narcissist will have their primary supply source as an intimate partner. Secondary supply source can be family members, friends, etc. Tertiary might be colleagues or even random people, like, they go to Starbucks in the morning and they get their coffee and they see that barista and they know they can charm him or her, and then they'll get like a little bit of supply from that, right? That sort of thing. Or maybe very distant family members, very distant friends would be like on the tertiary ing. But the thing is that they always have this supply source. They have to have that there. Because if you stop giving supply, they need that next person to go to, or the next person and the next person. And that's why they'll often talk about the narcissist will send out, like the same text message or a very similar text message to a whole bunch of people at once. And they're just waiting for the first bite. Like the first person to take the bait. Boom, they got their supply. Now they're getting that energy. They're draining that energy and emotional support from someone else once you stop giving it. So that's always what's going to happen. And they're going to control those supply sources, which are people. They're going to control those people, which they see as an extension of their own ego to serve their needs, right? Until that person becomes uncontrollable and leaves. So this explains why a parent, a mother or father who's a narcissist, psychopath, sociopath, this explains why that narc parent can create a codependent child. They don't always create codependent children. Often they'll create another narcissist, another psychopath, if they don't give that child any boundaries, and that child ends up taking the survival strategy by copying the abusive parent versus taking the codependent strategy, which is the people-pleasing strategy, which is sacrificing one's own needs in order to make sure the other person is okay. Like that's the bottom line of codependency, is people-pleasing. It's putting someone else's needs before your own. This explains why a narcissistic parent can create a codependent child, just like an alcoholic or an addict parent. The alcoholic and the addict parent had an obvious addiction. It was a bottle or a pill or a needle or something like that. It was a lot easier to see. The narcissist parent also had an addiction, and their addiction to narcissistic supply took precedence over you. If you grew up in a household like that, your parent prioritized their need for supply over your needs, your feelings, your thoughts, your perceptions of reality, you in general. That always took precedence, right? So the good news is that you can heal, right? Because the codependent will develop almost like an addiction to approval and validation, because you never got it as a kid and you had to work to get it in order to get love from that parent, in order to survive. The good news is that if you find yourself on that side of things, you can heal yourself. You can start to turn that inward, start to give yourself the approval and the validation that you need, so that you stop looking to other people for that, so that you stop getting entwined with narcissists and other manipulators who are looking for that. They're looking for someone who's going to place their sense of approval in them, and that's how they pull you in, first by seducing and flattering you, and then by degrading you and devaluing you. The narcissist is not going to change. So you've probably heard the phrase don't feed the monsters. I've said that before. Or you might see online people write don't feed the trolls. The people who go online and they want to type nasty stuff. Don't answer that. Don't respond to that. Don't feed that, meaning don't give them narcissistic supply. Because whether you give them positive or negative attention, you're going to fuel them. You're going to feed them. You're going to make them stronger. So, oops, I lost my screen. So, fair warning though, as soon as you take away that narcissistic supply, they are going to get pissed. If you take that supply away before they're done with you, right? They want to discard you on their terms because they want the total control. If you step out, you realize what's going on, you set a boundary, you step out, they're going to get really, really pissed, angry, maybe even really aggressive and violent. Get out of there. Run as soon as possible. As soon as you see that, if you see that once you stop attention, that person gets really angry, get away. No contact immediately. So the most important ways to avoid giving fuel to people like this, number one, going no contact. Cold turkey. Don't explain to them why you're removing yourself from their life. Normally you would do that in a normal situation if you weren't going to, you're just going separate ways with someone and they're not a toxic person. You want to have a conversation, or you're breaking up in a regular sort of breakup. You want to have like a face-to-face conversation. None of those rules apply to people like this because they will use that to their advantage. They will use that to plant doubts in your mind, to gaslight you, to try to confuse you, to try to suck you back in, to try to get you to spend all your energy feeding them in supply by defending yourself. Don't do it. Just go cold turkey, shut it off, block them entirely. Another strategy is gray rock. Now that's like if you find yourself with one of these people at work, like your boss or your coworker or someone at work, you realize, oh shit, like this is what they're doing. This is the game. If you cut off that supply, like cold turkey, and you try to remove yourself entirely, like your job can be in danger. It could get really bad at work. They might launch a whole smear campaign against you. So in that case, you want to be a little bit more gentle. And meanwhile, if I were you, I would be updating your resume, your CV, looking for another job quietly on the side, because you're never going to have a good time in that office with that person there. And if they have already targeted you, they're not going to stop targeting you. But the strategy that you can use to manage the situation in the meanwhile is what they call the gray rock technique. And that is essentially removing that emotional energy. So it's being boring, being uninteresting, not really giving them a lot, and in that way, they understand like you're there, but you're not there, and you have to be in contact with them, but you're not really feeding them. And so they can't take advantage of you in that way. They can't drain your energy in that way, but you're just having this sort of amicable, stale sort of interaction with them. Again, that gray rock thing though, that's really only a temporary way to manage the situation. You might find yourself having to do this if you're co-parenting with a narcissist, psychopath, or sociopath, doing that gray rock technique, but otherwise no contact, like only gray rock while you have to talk about the kids, and no contact about anything else in your life. Don't share anything else. So essentially the no contact and the gray rock are forms of boundaries. And that's the bottom line, is boundaries. Boundaries are what's going to stop you from feeding the narcissist, this narcissistic supply. So essentially those boundaries are predominantly around your energy and your emotions, like protecting your energy, protecting your emotions. If you saw the video that I did on responding versus reacting, that explains how to do this. That explains how to respond to people without reacting in the emotional way, because that emotional reaction is what feeds them. That's the bottom line. So I hope this was helpful for you. I hope you're able now to reflect back on your relationship from the past, or if you're in it right now, on how this played out. And maybe it helps you now to understand, oh, that's why they did that. That's why they said that. The thing that you just couldn't wrap your mind around. It's really that simple. It's some form of narcissistic supply that they were trying to get from you. So protect yourself with boundaries, keep yourself safe, protect your peace, protect your energy. I'm sending you all a big hug.